Hi everyone, Patty here again to discuss how the Analyze and Improve phase of my project went. Before I delve into the analysis, I want to recap my problem is I don't cook enough meals in a week, which results in unhealthy eating habits. And this includes eating junk foods, eating out, skipping meals, or eating meals that aren't nutritious. This is a big issue for me because I'm the only one that cooks in the house, so if I don't cook, my family is affected. And not only that, but not cooking leads to eating out all the time, which gets pretty pricey. So as a result, not cooking is a very important issue that I need to address. So I've set my goal to cook at least 5 times per week and to spend no more than an hour in the cooking process. In my last video, I addressed how I conducted the measure phase and what quality tools I used to measure the amount of times I cooked per week, the reasons why I didn't cook, and the amount of time I spent cooking. So for the rest of the video, I'm going to analyze that data and talk about the improvements I implemented and compare my improved data to my measured data to see if I'm making a significant improvement. So in my measure phase, I kept a log of my schedule. This is an example of how I tracked my data. And it's not very easy to tell when I cook, so I put it into a check sheet. So looking at this shows me that I cooked a total of 15 times over a course of 29 days, which is roughly 50% of the time. But you can see I did not reach my goal of cooking 5 times per week for any of those 4 weeks. And this is to be expected since it was my current process that I needed to improve. So it can be seen that Mondays and Tuesdays were the days I cooked the most. Out of all the days, I cooked 53% of the time on Mondays, 33% of the time on Tuesdays, and only 7% of the time on Thursdays and Saturdays. This is likely because according to my schedule, my week is lighter in the beginning rather than later where I have homework due or social events. So in analyzing the Pareto chart, it can be seen that I used homework as the biggest reason I didn't cook, which was about 30% of the time. No ingredients was my next biggest reason, followed by social and then family. This chart shows me that 90% of the time I used one of these 4 reasons as an excuse not to cook. So as a result, I needed to focus on these vital few when looking at improvements. So looking at my IMR control chart, this eye chart, the top chart, showed my process in the entire measure phase, including days I didn't cook. So there are a few points that were above the upper control limit, and at this point I looked back on my notes which said I had to go back to the store to get an ingredient for that day, so that's why it was longer cook time. Every other point was within my calculated control limits. The moving range chart at the bottom showed me the range from one point to the other and how big my ranges were moving. So this MR chart shows that every point is within my control limit. There are a few points which show that it's close to the upper action limit, but that just tells me I have a wide range, which makes sense because I'm going from not cooking to cooking some of these days. This chart shows only the days I cooked. I did this to eliminate any of those 0 cook times and focus on the times when I actually did cook. It shows that I'm within my control limits in these charts, and when looking at the chart, the eye chart, I'm really only focused on the upper warning limits and upper control limits, as any points near these limit lines means I'm taking too much time and possibly inefficient at the cooking process. So now that I've analyzed my measure phase, it's time to talk about my improvement ideas. Because I saw no ingredients was the second biggest reason on my Pareto chart and one that I could easily address, I decided to meal plan. And I do this on Sunday nights or Monday mornings so that Mondays I can shop for enough ingredients to last me the week. My second idea was to cook in bulk on Mondays and Tuesdays, and because my check sheet and schedule showed that Mondays and Tuesdays were my least busiest days, or at least the days I tended to cook more, I chose to focus the bulk of my cooking to these days. My third improvement was to integrate cooking as a family and social activity. Because I didn't want to give up on my social life, I decided that cooking for social events was better than decreasing those events. With these improvements in place, I collected my improved data the same way I did my measured data. Again, these next 2 slides here are examples of my calendar for the months of October and November. So I compiled the days I did cook into this check sheet, and over a total of 8 weeks, I cooked 50 times. This means I went from cooking 50% of the time to 90% of the time. So I wanted to know, was there a real difference or a statistical difference between these two means? So I did a hypothesis test where my null hypothesis was there was no difference, and my research hypothesis was there was a difference. And after running the numbers, I found that at 95% confidence level, there was a significant difference between my means, which means I am improving my cook process. So I did use a Pareto chart in my measure phase to chart the reasons why I didn't cook, but after hearing some feedback, I decided to make a second chart of why I did cook. So this shows me that almost 90% of the time I cooked, I did it because I had the right ingredients. And that just tells me that meal planning was a direct result of cooking 90% of the time in the improved phase. My second Pareto chart is why I didn't cook. You can see that almost half the time I didn't cook, it was because I had leftovers. And this was a good thing because it meant I already had food in the fridge I needed to eat. These next three categories here are something that I can directly compare to my measure phase. So here I'll compare my improve and measure Pareto charts. You can see that I used homework as an excuse not to cook 25% of the time versus 33% of the time in my measure phase. So this tells me that since implementing my improvements, I've decreased the amount of times I've used homework as an excuse. And this could likely be from having more energy from eating better, so that was a great thing. I used family as an excuse almost 19% of the time versus 16% of the time in my measure phase. However, I only used social as an excuse 5% of the time versus 19% of the time in my measure phase. So overall, this tells me that I decreased the amount of times I used my original reasons not to cook. I just didn't get to decrease family time. And this is probably due to external circumstances like my husband having some time off work. So I wanted to take advantage of that family time by going out to eat instead of cooking. So moving on, my second goal was to limit my cooking down to 1 hour. And this chart shows my cooking times for the entire improved phase. As you can see, the points fit pretty well in the control limits for both the I and the moving range chart. There are a few points above the upper warning limit, but none over 60 minutes. And there are no real outliers or concerning trends, which tells me that my process has improved. And my second chart shows only the days I cooked. And because of the lower standard deviation in my data, my control limits have tightened, leading to a few points being above the warning limit and 1 point being outside the upper action limit, but still within my 60-minute specification limit. Besides that 1 point, I don't see any other concerning trends, which leads me again to believe that overall my process has improved. So I decided to calculate CP and CPK because I set my own spec limits of not exceeding 1 hour. So my lower spec limit was 0 minutes and my upper spec limit was 60 minutes. So I saw that my capability index and process center for both datasets are less than 1. And this means over the long run, I'm likely to have cook times that are higher than my spec limits. Because my CP is less than 1, my process can't meet the spec limits, and because my CPK is less than 1, that means my process variation is too big or my process center is shifted too far one way. Having a high standard deviation is likely due to the natural high variance in my cook times. Making a sandwich one day is not going to take as long as making a casserole the other day. So having a CP and CPK greater than 1 would mean more to me after a few months of cooking because of the large data set would hopefully reduce my standard deviation. So now that I have discussed my analyze and improve phase, it's time to keep collecting data. And since it seems that my implementations have indeed improved both my goals, I have and will continue to collect data until December 4th, at which I will take that data and compare it to my baseline. Thanks for watching, and as always, any comments are appreciated. Thanks.